This incredible photo shows damage to the conning tower of the German World War I submarine, the SMU-48. The damage was inflicted by a British merchant ship, the SS Eastpoint, and resulted in the deaths of 2 of the 4 crew members who were in the conning tower. One of these was the skipper of the SMU-48, Kapitanleutnant Berndt, who up until this point had enjoyed a really successful career, sinking 21 ships with a total of over 50,000 tons. The really crazy thing is that nobody aboard the SS Eastpoint knew that this had happened. They'd all actually abandoned ship well before it hit the SMU-48. So it's an incredible story, and there's a load more to it as well. And if this was the only story associated with the Eastpoint, it'd be a pretty incredible one, but it isn't. The Eastpoint is an absolutely fascinating ship. And also, what happened to the SMU-48 after it had been hit by the Eastpoint as well. There's another incredible story there. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk you through the whole lot, and I'm going to show you what it's like to dive the Eastpoint, because of course the reason I'm talking about it is it's a deep wreck dive, and one that I've done many times. It's absolutely a real favourite of mine. One of the great things about the Eastpoint is that we've actually got some really good multi-beam imagery of it, so you can visualise what you're going to see before you go down. This is courtesy of the University of Plymouth, but what you can see there is that's the stern, which is the highest bit, the steering quadrant. You'll see that during the dive. That's where we're going to land, that's where we're going to finish, and it's probably the nicest bit of the wreck. Other really nice bit is this lump here, which is the massive engine and the bits of hull sticking up either side of it. So you'll see those on the dive as well. I'm going to give you this whole lot during the course of the video. I think you'll really enjoy it. I hope you'll really enjoy it. As always though, please, leave us a like, leave us a dislike, leave us a comment, tell us what you didn't like, etc. But without any further ado, I'm going to crack on with the story of the Eastpoint and the U-48 and the awesome diving that's to be done on it. So I'm sure many of you will have seen that I'm diving with Rick again, and there's going to be a whole load of photos during this video. You'll also see that I'm putting in the lazy shots. Not as easy as you might imagine, whilst also holding a selfie stick. But hey, there we go. I like to challenge myself, and there it goes. Lazy shots going down, and I'm using it to pull me down. You'll also see that I've got a different camera set up on this dive. So I've got an Insta360 Ace Pro 2. Stuck on my helmet. I've got my 2 Paralens Vaquitas also on my helmet as normal, and on the selfie stick I have got a GoPro 11 in a kind of deep casing there. So a whole load of video, and what I'm going to be doing is chopping backwards and forwards. In fact, there's a really interesting story with a selfie stick. I've got to tell it now, and it's what I do is you'll see. A bit further down in the dive, I put the selfie stick away and I actually clip it off on my right shoulder. Later on in the dive, in fact, when I've completed the dive, I'm on my deco stops. I reach to try and find the selfie stick, because I think it'd be nice to get some selfie video on deco stops. No selfie stick. In fact, all I've got is the actual clip. So I've lost the full selfie stick with my deep GoPro housing and obviously the GoPro in it. So that's pretty upsetting. But I have all of the deco to kind of come to terms with it. And for whatever reason, I don't really tell anybody else on the boat other than Rick. So anyway, that's the end of that. But then later on in the evening, I get a Facebook message from one of the other divers on the boat. And as you can see, it's absolutely wonderful. So it's one of those things. Just when you think something's gone, then all of a sudden another diver sorts you out. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you. Cheers, Raoul, for sorting that out and reuniting it with me. So anyway, that's a great bit of this dive. But you don't want to know about my diving incompetence. What you really want to know is about the stories. So let's start at the beginning. The SS Eastpoint was built in 1901 in Sunderland. It was a really big ship, 118 metres long, 5,200 tonnes, absolutely, similar to hundreds, thousands of other ships of the period. At the time it was sunk, it was operated by the Furness Withy Line, and that was how it was identified. You can see this kind of crockery here, this plate and this cup, they're both mine. And that was how the Eastpoint, along with its size, that was how the Eastpoint was identified, maybe 20 or in fact maybe even more than that, 40 years ago. Now, for those who are interested in such things, this video is currently being recorded on the Insta360 Ace Pro 2, but I'm going to switch any moment now, and this is the Paralens Vaquita footage. I think you can see, it's completely different quality there, isn't it? I want to use the Insta360 in the future for more of my diving videos. The only problem is my helmet mount is currently looking down too much. So once I've got that sorted, you'll be seeing it in a lot more of my videos. What you can see me doing though here is turning off the GoPro. You can see the strobes in front of me, so I'm getting to the bottom of the shot. I'm turning that on and clipping it on, and this is the last time I see this GoPro until Raoul really kindly hands it to me later on in the evening. So what actually happened is a little screw thread that goes into the bottom of the selfie stick. It unscrewed, and that's how come it ended up on the seabed. But I've subsequently superglued it, so that won't be happening again. What I'm doing now is obviously just turning on my strobes, and I'm going to be sticking on the bottom of the shot line. So those of you who see my other videos will have seen me do this lots of times before, and probably the only difference this time is I'm doing it a bit earlier than I normally do. I guess you're probably also a little bit concerned about the quality of the video. Clearly it's pitch black here. The good news is I've got a new torch which also doubles as a video light, and I'm going to turn that on in a bit, and it makes the quality of the video much better. And of course what I've also got is a whole load more information about the East Point. I've got some photos, I've got some diagrams, and I'm going to tell you all the rest of the story, which I know I've been neglecting a bit, but you can see on the dive, here I am, I've got to the wreck. Yeah, you can see there's some wreckage down there, but difficult to tell what it is at the moment. That torch is coming on any moment now. Now, there we go, look at it. And just a reminder that this is us here on the stern, so that the highest bit of the wreck, and you can see that, 60 metres. The actual bottom of the seabed here is 68, so having a good look round, there's a few other divers there. Right, let's get back to the death of Kapitanleutnant Berndt Boost though. So I've already told you he was a pretty successful German skipper. He'd spent a year in combat, sunk a whole load of ships, and he was in this area of Plymouth, which is Bigbury Bay, or maybe just offshore from Bigbury Bay, and looking for ships. He'd already sunk one ship already that day, a small sailing vessel, and he spotted the East Point, which must have looked like an absolutely fantastic target. 120 metres long, 5,000 tonnes, and he got really close to it. According to the report from the East Point, he was about 80, 100 metres away. So the torpedo hit on the port side, just kind of forward of the bridge, and the ship took about 10 or 15 minutes to sunk. All the crew got off in boats. There was a load of other vessels in the area, so the submarine, after torpedoing the East Point, dived to periscope depth and was looking around for other ships to sink. And what must have happened is, as the East Point was sinking, the submarine was no longer looking at it. That's when it collided with the submarine. So incredible piece of misfortune on behalf of the SMU 48. But I guess that's what kind of happens. Back on the dive, you can see that's the propeller, huge bronze propeller, and I'll come back to that one later on because there's another interesting story about that. So now, in order to fight this kind of submarine, a type U-43, you needed to have 4 men in the conning tower. And what happened when the East Point hit the U-48, you can imagine it was really significant explosion. It's a massive ship, a small submarine, and it knocked out 2 of the 4 people in the conning tower. What also happened is that it sprung a leak, and you've obviously seen that photo with all the damage as well. So you can imagine the guys in the submarine, they've just been hit by a ship, 2 of their mates have been knocked out, there's water pouring in, so their kind of first concern has got to be to kind of save the ship. So supposedly what happened is they jumped through the hatch into the main control room as the water's pouring in, and they then closed the hatch, effectively sealing off the conning tower from the rest of the submarine. Obviously great for the submarine, and the submarine then crash dived all the way to the seabed. All this information is in the German logs, and Actually, what you can see there is I've just found something. That's looks like the lid of a paraffin lamp. So you can see I'm just going to put it up there and leave it there. It's brass, obviously. This is the stern of the vessel, so this is presumed there's a whole load of debris here. So it's presumably it's fallen down. So submarine crash dived. They seal the hatch off, and unfortunately the two guys who are knocked unconscious are in the conning tower, which now fills full of water, and of course they drown. Kind of horrendous for them, but you can absolutely understand why the submarine felt that they had to do that. So what they ended up there for is with two dead guys, and one of the two dead guys was the skipper, Kapitanleutnant Berndt. The other one was effectively his weapons officer, slightly different name in those days, but yeah. So those are the two guys who are dead. The submarine obviously can't use its periscope anymore, so it's got no visibility. So what they do is stay on the bottom until it gets nightfall, and they then come up to the surface, and once they're on the surface they can get access to the conning tower again. They get access to the conning tower and they do a sea burial for the two dead crewmen, and this is all beautifully recorded in the log for the German submarine. And for those of you who've never seen a German First World War log, they're incredible things. I'm lucky that my sister can speak German, so she translates them for me, but it's all in there. But that isn't the most incredible bit about the U-48 story, and I know I'm talking about the U-48, not the East Point. So I'm going to come back to the East Point. So the U-48 is badly damaged. It cannot operate. The periscopes don't work. They can't go into the conning tower because it leaks. They're in the middle of the English Channel, and they need to get back to Germany clearly to do some repairs. So there's two ways back for them. One way is they can go up the English Channel. The problem with that is where it gets narrow at the eastern end where Dover is, they know there's a load of anti-submarine nets, there's a load of minefields, and there's a load of ships there whose purpose is clearly to try and kill submarines. So that's a difficult thing to do when you're badly damaged. In fact, actually, if you look just there, you can probably see that thing I'm holding on to there. That is the other bit of the lamp. So it's you can see me playing around with my torch, but I am going to try and get it out. Unfortunately, it's completely wedged in there. It's totally solid, so it's not coming out. But you know, interesting thing to see. And the East Point has been dived a lot, so there's very little left on it. Back in the day, they used to dive this on air, of course, and supposedly they used to go down with crowbars and pickaxes and shovels and all sorts of stuff, and basically get everything off that they possibly could. But anyway, they clearly missed that. And if you want to go down with and you can see the lid of it just at the top of the video there, and there's also a nice little lobster as well. So if you want to go and get it with a pickaxe and a crowbar or whatever, that's where it is. There's also a diver there. I think that might be Rick, and he's trying to get some photos of me. I think I asked him to on this dive. But going back to the U-48, so the U-48 needs to go back to Germany, which means that the only way to come back is around Ireland, over the top of Scotland, and past the Orkney Islands, and then down through the North Sea. And believe it or not, that is what they did with a badly damaged submarine. And huge credit to the executive officer on this submarine, who unlike most of the German First World War submarines, they were normally captained by regular Navy officers, and it was quite a prestigious, high class thing to do. So the Navy Reserve officers, which the XO weren't normally given command of submarines. They were kind of second class officers. So I've got to give him a name. It would be rude not to. That's Hinrich Hermann Haschigen, and there he is on a submarine. And fair play to him. he got the U-48 back to Germany. Not only did he get it back, but en route, sort of north of Ireland, they had a surface gun battle with an armed sailing ship, and ended up sinking the sailing ship. And he got back to Germany, and clearly the Germans thought he'd done so well that they actually gave him command of his own submarine. So he then took over command of the U-22 and went on to have a really successful career. So he survived the First World War. He had 28 ships to his credit, with a total of 24,000 tons. And by the looks of things, he lived a long and hopefully happy life, and eventually passed away in April 1978 in Germany. Frankly, what a bloke. They just don't make them like that anymore, and an amazing story. And for that alone, he deserves to be remembered. But what happened to the U-48? Well, it was repaired and put back to sea again with a different skipper. And unfortunately, the different skipper decided that he was going to go through all the defences in Dover, and he ended up getting stuck on a sandbank in the night. Couldn't float the submarine off. Got discovered by the Royal Navy in the morning, and they were attacked by a load of Royal Navy vessels. Killed about half the crew. The other half of the crew surrendered, and the U-48 was left partially submerged on this sandbank. Interestingly enough, a whole load of it was stripped by the Royal Navy, and for years one of the guns was on display in Kent, supposedly until the 1960s or the 1970s, when it appears to have been scrapped, which is really sad, because it's, frankly, what a fantastic piece of history, and it'd be lovely to still have it around. Anyway, so that was the end of the U-48. One of the interesting things about it is during the interrogation of the crew, and once again the transcripts for this are available, the crew slate their new skipper and effectively say things like, this would have never happened if Berndt Boos hadn't been killed, and presumably if Heinrich Haschigen had been transferred to another submarine. So they were really unimpressed with their new skipper. So they blame him for the submarine being killed and everything, or being destroyed and everything. So really interesting, and I guess shows in this kind of small unit environment how important leadership is. So that's nearly the end of the U-48, but there's one more bit of it to talk about, which is that the U-48 was swallowed by the Goodwin Sands, which are a notorious area of coast, an area off the southeast coast of England, where the sand constantly shifts, comes and goes and everything. So the U-48 was swallowed by it and vanished, but supposedly it reappears every now and again. So this photo shows it reappearing in 1978. You can see it just under the water there, but then the sand came in, covered it all over, and it's gone again. So that's the tale of the U-48. Heinrich Haschigen, what a great bloke. But let's go back to the East Point. And before I talk any further, you can probably see I've spotted something on the dive here, and that there is a spare blade for the propeller. I've never seen that before. I've dived the East Point loads and loads of times. So really interesting thing to see. This is on the seabed, so you can see here that I'm 66 meters down, I guess. So it's fallen off the wreck and ended up on the seabed. And later on, I'm going to spot at least one more up on the wreck. Once again, I've not seen it before. Why is that important? Well, that's important because the East Point is a wreck that is owned by somebody, and it's owned by my good friend Tony, who bought it in the 1980s. So it's quite famous amongst Plymouth divers that this is Tony's wreck, and if you find stuff on it, then you've obviously got to he's got to give you permission for it. Now, Tony is normally pretty good at allowing people to have anything that they find on his wreck, so my plate and my cup and all that kind of stuff. But the reason he bought it is because he wanted it for the bronze prop. So his plan in the early 90s was to dive down, put a load of explosives on the prop that you've already seen, and blow off the prop. He would then get a local beam trawler, which would lift the prop up. He would take it in and he would salvage it. Now, clearly, that didn't happen. The prop's still there, and obviously, if he had blown it off, it would demolish the stern as well. So we can be really grateful that didn't happen, for the fact that the East Point is such a nice wreck and stands up so tall at the stern. But why didn't it happen? Well, the amusing thing about it was that the beam trawler that Tony was planning to use got done for drug smuggling several just I think weeks before he'd planned to use it. So obviously it got done for drug smuggling. It got impounded by customs and excise, which meant that Tony's plan to use it was out the window. So hey, it was a win for the rest of us. So you can just see there that I've come up on the top of the wreck. There's another diver just swimming past me there. You can see I've come up 4 meters, I guess, 4 or 5 meters off the seabed onto the top of the stern, and actually it's collapsed an awful lot since I last dived it. It slopes down far more than it ever used to. So, like all of these wrecks, it's in the final stages really of its life. It will, in the not too distant future, it will be completely flat, and nobody will be able to see frankly how beautiful the stern is. But there we go. It is 100 odd years old. It was torpedoed, and actually it suffered a whole load more damage. So I'm gonna come back onto that. But first, I need to introduce you to this gentleman here, whose name is Harold Young. He was the master of the East Point when it was torpedoed. He'd also been the master of the East Point for a long time prior to this event, and therefore is intrinsically linked with almost everything that happens to the East Point. Those of you who recognise such things will have seen that he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which was a gallantry medal awarded at that time for kind of relatively junior ranking naval officers, but was also awarded to civilians such as Harold, although he did subsequently get a temporary commission in the Royal Navy Reserve. Now, I've got loads of information about Harold, and it's all come through an online meeting with his grandson, Nick Young, and I'm so grateful to Nick, who's given me a trove of information about his grandfather, as well as some of the stuff you've seen already, the photos and the framed thing on his wall. He's also given me letters that he wrote. He's given me newspaper clippings. He's given me some more photos that I'm going to come on to later on, and one of the fabulous things I've got is, the full details of Harold's career, basically from starting till he retired at the beginning of the Second World War, and it's absolutely incredible, and I think you'll all really enjoy it and find it interesting. And one of the really nice things as I dive the East Point, as I've done, a lot, and as I look at those cups and those plates I've got of it, for me that gives me a direct connection to this person who I'd never have heard of otherwise. Now, the reason he got his gallantry medal was because the East Point was taken up from trade in 1915 to support the landings at Gallipoli in the Dardanelles, as it was then known. So obviously this was Winston Churchill's gambit to kind of avoid the stalemate of the Western Front, and it proved to be a bit of a mess. So, but the East Point was sent over there, and as a large freighter, it was used for moving stuff from the some of the islands, which were the kind of the main supply bases, into the front line, which was on the Gallipoli Peninsula, which is obviously part of Turkey now. So the East Point was moving supplies backwards and forwards, and Harold Young was the master of the East Point whilst all that was happening. Now, during one of these runs, they were shelled by the Turks. I don't know, maybe this was a regular occurrence. I'd imagine it probably would have been, because in Gallipoli, the Turkish, by and large, had the high ground. The Allied forces, the Brits, the Australians and New Zealanders, the French, were all by and large in the low ground. So I'd imagine being shelled was quite a common occurrence. And So the East Point actually got hit by shells and set on fire. The shells hit it in the forward holds, so near the bow. And one of the things I always think is I wonder whether that weakened the bow, and it's why the bow has been collapsed. Although that's not the only reason that the bow has got damaged. Once again, I'll come back to that. So the East Point is set on fire. It's been shelled. What they did then was they tried to put the fire out. They couldn't put the fire out, so they ran it aground, and then obviously once it was aground, they could flood the hold, which had hay in it for horses and mules and those kind of things. And when they put it aground, they flooded it, and therefore they put the fire out. Although that did take them nearly 18 hours. So, what an experience. Must have been, horrendous for the skipper and the crew. But that's what Harold Young got his Distinguished Service Cross for, I guess, saving the ship, if not the cargo. Now, having got the fire out, it then took them 2 days to get the East Point off the beach. It's a big ship, clearly. They tried a load of tugs, they didn't work, and in the end they had to get a cruiser in to attach some tow ropes and drag it off the beach. And then I think they took it back to Egypt, where they patched it up. And after being patched up, the East Point came back to Gallipoli. I presume they were short of ships. They needed everyone they could get. And while it was in and around that area, it actually got hit again in the bow by a ship called the Bonvilston. Now, the Bonvilston had a pretty bad track record, because after hitting the East Point, it then hit another ship in January 1916, a ship called the SS Geelong, which was actually big in the East Point, 8,000 tons, and hit it so hard that it actually sank. Fortunately, there was nobody on board. The Geelong had just disembarked 1,300 Aussies in Egypt. So the Bonvilston, clearly, not a great ship. If it was eventually torpedoed by the Germans in October 1918, and the wreck is in the North Channel in between Scotland and Ireland. Don't know if you can see there. What I've just done is below me there. That is another what I think was a blade for the prop, one of the spare blades. So obviously I've seen the one on the seabed earlier on, and that one there was on the top of the wreck. So. Too busy talking about the Geelong and the Bonvilston, but I don't get a very good footage of it, but it is there anyway. So the East Point, though, carried on supporting the war effort in Gallipoli. And actually, if you have a look underneath me there, you can see that kind of circular object. That is the prop shaft. So what I'm now doing is making my way from the stern, where I've been kind of rooting around and looking inside. I'm making my way forward now to the area where the engine is, and that's the area that I found plates and crockery and stuff in the past. So in a bit you'll see me kind of rooting around there, and you'll see all sorts of bits of fragments and stuff. And I find a really nice water filter, or part of a water filter anyway, but you'll see that in a bit. So the East Point went back to, in fact there's a big old winch, so I'm kind of in between the two rear cargo holds at the moment. There you go. Imagine the cargoes that has lifted, particularly in the context of this, supporting the Gallipoli expert. It must have not Gallipoli expert, I guess, disaster maybe, I don't know, whatever word we're going to use to describe Gallipoli. But anyway, the last part that the East Point had to play in the Gallipoli campaign, let's go with that one, was to support the evacuation. And for those of you who don't know very much about the Gallipoli campaign, the evacuation is the one bit of it that is universally regarded as a complete success. Actually, maybe not universally regarded. I'm sure the Turkish didn't consider it as a success, but certainly from the Allied point of view, 83,000 troops who were removed over several nights without the Turks being aware of it, which is just an unbelievable thing to try and achieve. And the East Point played its part in that, although at this point the East Point was absolutely battered. Clearly it had all that shell fire, it had hit the Bonvilston. And the letters from Harold Young to, I think they're his sisters, make absolutely incredible reading. They really make his feelings about the whole thing clear. I'm going to read it out because I think it's just really, really powerful. He says, We left hurriedly at the end when this wreck of a ship, East Point, was filled with every conceivable old thing, from dead men's clothes and empty cartridge cases to heavy field guns and motor ambulances. We sailed away with 400 troops on board, brought down at night straight from the firing line. By the way, all we had left in the way of life-saving appliances was one good boat and just 55 lifebelts. The ship was in a sinking condition and the sea infested with submarines. That's really powerful stuff, and I'm going to read the rest of it in a minute. But before I do that, I just want you to have a look at this, which I've just found. I know I'm kind of burning it out with my light there, but we will come back to it later on, and you probably see there that it's a bit of a charcoal water filter. So they would have charcoal in there, they'd pour water through it, and it would purify it. It'd come out at the bottom a lot cleaner. I'm going to bring Rick to see that later on. He's going to get some photos of it, but you probably see in this area there's various other bits and pieces that I'm having a rummage around, all sorts of bits and pieces. I've got no idea what that thing is there. Maybe the base of a lamp, for instance, possibly small porthole, don't know. So while I'm rummaging around, though, I'm going to read out the rest of that letter from Harold Young to his sisters, because it blows me away, how easy it is to connect with a man from so long ago. All kinds of people were about that trip. Viscount Barrington's son and heir was in charge of the troops, and Baron de Robox slept under the cabin table. I mean, I just love the imagery that portrays. It makes me think, of a horrendous ship, that's gone through all these traumas, that's been battered, maybe the crew as well, and certainly the master comes across like that as well, and all of a sudden they're participating in this really important event, the evacuation. They must have known how important it was, they must have known the risk, and I think that all comes across in that brilliant letter from Horace there, and really kind of, for me, brings it all, sort of, it reaches back over 100 years, and all of a sudden I can feel, I'm on the wreck, but I can feel that I'm in that place. I can feel, what they must have been thinking, what they must have been enduring. And here I am, looking on the seabed, and there's all sorts of broken bits and pieces, broken crockery. You've probably seen I've just picked up a spoon there. And that always makes me think, did Harold Young eat with that spoon? Probably, I guess. Did Viscount Barrington's son eat with that spoon? I just love those kind of connections, and I want to talk more about Harold Young because he's an absolutely fascinating individual, and he's part of this whole East Point story as well. And because of Nick Young, his grandson, I've got loads of information about him, which is great. So I know he was born in 1880 in Stoke Newington. So at the time of the East Point sinking, he was 37 years old. He learnt his trade in sailing ships, so he was part of that transition from sail to steam. And in fact, there's a photo of him on one of his first ships with some of the other crew, and they look like it looked like a motley crew, to be honest, but incredible. He broke an arm falling out of the rigging of one of them, so that's while he was learning his trade, and eventually he qualified as a master and took over the East Point in 1909, and obviously was on the East Point until it was sunk in 1917, so was the master for 11 years. Following the sinking of the East Point, he was then given another ship, the SS Rapallo, and that was torpedoed again in January 1918. So within less than 12 months, he'd been on two ships that were sunk, both of them by submarines. Unfortunately, the second one, there was a casualty, which was the assistant cook, a lad called Thomas Samuel Jenkins, who was only 15 years old at the time. So, a really boy, not even a man, I guess. Thomas Jenkins was from Cardiff and is commemorated on the memorial in Tower Hill, which, if you've never been, is an incredible place. And one of the other interesting things about Harold Young is he was there for that to be opened. And I often wonder, in fact, one of the things I've got from Nick Young is a copy of the programme from the opening of the memorial, and I often wonder if while Harold was at that, whether he thought about Thomas Jenkins. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have done. But Harold Young continued his career, and his last ship was the MV Pacific Ranger. He retired from that one in mid-1940, which was obviously in the middle of the Second World War, or not in the middle of the Second World War, at the beginning of the Second World War. He left it in June 1940, and in October 1940, the Pacific Ranger was torpedoed about 100 miles northwest of Ireland, and the crew spent a week in small boats. I often wonder what Harold Young thought about that. No doubt he was sat in his wherever he retired to, in a cottage or whatever, hopefully in front of a fire, with a much deserved cup of something, and no doubt he was very pleased that he wasn't on the Pacific Ranger when that happened. So Harold Young, after retirement, he became one of the wardens of the sunk ports, which is a really old traditional appointment. The sunk ports are all they're all silted up now, so none of them are actually ports. They're in Kent, so it's kind of like a ceremonial appointment, and he got to open fates and all that kind of stuff. So no doubt he enjoyed all of that. And when he eventually died, there is a wonderful, wonderful letter sent by the secretary of the Furness Withy Lines, explaining how much he's missed. And once again, I'm going to put it up so you can see it, and I'm going to read it out. It is with deep regret that we learn from your letter of the death of your father, and I wish to express to you and all his family our deepest sympathy. Captain Harold James Young DSC had a fine record of services from 1903 to 1940 with this group of companies. I gather his first command was the East Point, and he was her master from 1909 until she was torpedoed in 1917. Then he was appointed to Rapallo and commanded her until she was torpedoed in 1918. Pacific Ranger, 1935 to 1940, was his last ship. Those of us who remain from those days hold his name in high esteem. And that is that's a fabulous eulogy. It's I think shows exactly what kind of man he was and how the esteem in which he was held. So back to the dive. Obviously, I've missed a whole load while I've been talking about the stories, and I'm afraid I'm a bit of an East Point obsessive. So apologies if you wanted to know more about the diving, but this is all still in and around that area near the engine. So just behind the engine. I mean, while I've been talking, I've actually gone around the engine. You may have glimpsed it briefly. I don't really look at it. I'm kind of more focused on what's on the seabed, which is all this sort of stuff. And I've been in and around this area before. You've probably just seen the diver above me there. That is Rick, and I've just remembered that is that beautiful bit of water filter there. So I think to myself, that'll make a really good photo. So what I really need is to go and get Rick and get him over here and to get a photo of it, because I know he will he'll like that. So I haven't quite thought about it yet, but I am going to think about it very, very soon. I think just before I do it though, there's another spoon to be had somewhere in here. So you can probably see in amongst the silt there's all sorts of bits and pieces there, and this area is really interesting because what happens is the tide clears stuff out every now and again, and stuff will move around. So you do find new bits and pieces in here. So I've had several plates and cups, and I've seen egg cups and all sorts of bits and pieces come out of here. Clearly, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself with this whole calling Rick over, but I remember it from the dive. I definitely got Rick to come over here, and I'm waiting for him to come over because I want to show you the photo, and the photo he takes is really cool. And for those of you who don't know, the way I make these videos is I don't watch the video in advance. But very often, what I tend to do is talk over my memory of it. But there you go. I knew I was going to get Rick, and he's actually swimming back to the shot. So I'm going to grab his fin and say, "Hey, Rick, come over here. I've got something you need to see." And whenever I do this, there's always a bit of a kind of moment. Oh, I wonder if I can remember exactly where it is. But I'm not very far away, clearly. So I'm going to take Rick over. And you can probably see, one of the nice things you can see about this shot is the way that actually the deck has collapsed and is kind of sloping down from top left to top right. And that must have been a bulkhead there. So probably to the right is maybe outside, and to the left is inside. So this is, the galley or something like that. So I'm pointing that out to Rick, who I'm sure will spot it himself. You can also see I've got my torch on video light, which is obviously, hopefully helping him illuminate it. And there, Rick is going in for the kill. He's got that massive fisheye lens. He's got that really good quality camera. And there it is. You can see the results there. Lovely, lovely photo. I mean, that thing would be absolutely gleaming if it was intact. I, of course, am very keen to show Rick my spoon. I want a photo with it. At this time, I think it's silver plated. I subsequently discover it's not. It's nickel oxide, which is also doesn't corrode underwater, but is clearly nowhere near as exciting. In fact, that's it. I've got two spoons, one which was silver plated and the silver's come off it, and the one that I've just picked up there, the one on my right, that's the nickel oxide one, which I think is silver, but unfortunately turns out not to be. Now, of course, the other thing is I have a real personal connection with the East Point, or I feel that I've got a personal connection anyway, and it's not because of the fact I've dived it loads of times, although that does give me a strong affection for it. It's not just because it's a great dive, which of course it is. It's not just because I found various bits on it. So I've had obviously the plates and the cutlery. I've had portholes off it in the past, and various other bits and pieces, all obviously gone through the receiver of wreck and everything. But the reason I have a strong personal connection with the East Point is it was the dive on which I managed to flood my rebreather in August 2024. And for those of you who haven't seen it, I've put that video online, and you can see me. In fact, this area here where I am now is where I start to realise that I've got a problem with my rebreather, and it's when I start. I then head from here back to the shop, very similar to what you're going to see me doing shortly on this dive. So now, fortunately, I'm not having that problem this time. My rebreather is all in good order, or certainly seems to be anyway. So. But if you haven't watched that video and you would like to do it, I'm going to put a link so you can go and find it. And it's something I know lots of people have enjoyed watching, and hopefully it's helped a few people. But it's another personal connection with it. Anyway, back to the dive. So you can see I'm still here with Rick. We're rooting around. For those of you who have been watching my shear water in the bottom left, you can see that we're up to 96 minutes of TTS, so that's an hour and a half. Being on the bottom, or dive time, is about 30 minutes. So if I leave for the surface now, I'm going to be coming up somewhere between that kind of 2 to 2.5 hours sweet spot, which is normally what we do on these trips. James, the skipper of In Deep, from Seeker of In Deep, that's his normal thing, no more than 2.5 hours. Now, maybe me, I always try and dive 2.5 hours. Hey, you've got to feel like you're getting value for money, right? But clearly there's a fine line there, and I do sometimes get it wrong and end up a bit over. But what I'm doing now is with Rick, we are heading back on the bottom. You probably recall from the multi-beam right at the beginning of this video that there's three-ish high points on the wreck. One of them is at the stern, one of them is in the middle where the engine is, and there's a kind of high-ish point near the bow as well, or certainly on the port side of it. But in order to get from the engine to the stern, and clearly we're going to need to drop down onto the seabed. There's that winch that I went past earlier on. You may recall that, and if you just saw up in front of me there were the strobes, and I think they've got to be 20 odd meters away, so I think it shows just how good the visibility is. Obviously it's dark, but the visibility is good. It also shows how fantastic those strobes are as well, and I get on about strobes quite a lot in a lot of my videos, and that's because they're really important to me. And on a dive like this, as soon as you see the strobes and you're heading back, it's a really nice feeling, because it means that that you're going to be able to get back to the shot line. And you've probably just seen in front of me there's a diver with some fins on, light coloured fins. So once again they're doing the same thing, and you can see the wreck is starting to kind of come back up again here. So this is the stern. We talked about that earlier on, how it started to collapse down from what it once was, but it's still, still really impressive, still really big. And this is somewhere up here is where those blades were. In fact, there's the shot line. You can see the blue string. That was how it was. That was the waster. So that's how it was secured into the first pair. Obviously, in fact, just in front of me there, the other side of the rope, I think you can see one of those blades. So the first, there you go. You can see it definitely. One of those blades. I didn't know that was there. There may even be another one on the left-hand side, or that could just be a bit of plate, a bit difficult to see. But in front of me there's my my double strobes, and if you haven't watched my strobe video, I'll put a link in for that as well, because these they're really important to us on this kind of diving. But you can see what I'm not hanging around. I'm starting my ascent all the time. I'm putting my stuff away. You probably see I'm just having a look down there. You can see some other divers on the wreck. Once again, shows how good the visibility is, even though it's really dark and really green. It's a bit disappointing. I'd love to have my my Insta working, so you got better footage of it, but it's just looking down, so it's quite disorientating and not very good. But hopefully in future videos you'll see the Insta 360, because I'm sure this would be much better quality, and you get a real a much better sense of what was going on. But hey, there we go. You always got to be working to improve, always got to be working to do things differently. You probably see there on the little graph on the bottom, you can see me starting to the red dots climbing up the purple line. So that's my ascent there. You can see the TTS 106 minutes. First deco stop is at 30 meters. There we go. A nice good shot of the sheer water. You can see there's another diver. I think that no, it's not Rick. Rick's doesn't have aluminium cylinders, so Rick's, I think, down there below the diver with the white fins. In fact, the diver with the white fins, that's Mike, I think. The diver with the yellow box there, not 100% certain who that is, but it does give you a good feel for what it's like on an ascent there. You can see all the strobes down the bottom. You can see divers coming up. I like to do what I'm doing here, which is to come off the line. It's much less congested, and I also quite like looking back at the line as well. So I've just skipped forward a little bit, and the reason I've done that is so that you can see this, which is me changing the PO2 on my inspiration. I don't often get that on my videos, so it's quite nice to see it. But there you go. If you're interested in how you do it, that's the button sequence. And I've also got this one here, which is my my sheer water as well. So you can see me, kind of see me doing it on that as well. But there you go. You can see I'm 40 odd meters. I pushed up to 1.5 PO2 on both my computers. You can see loads of other divers in the water around me, above and below me, and this is really common for this stage of a dive like this. You just get everybody's gone in pretty much together, everybody's coming up the line together, and as long as everybody is together, it's going to make the whole thing a lot safer. So next item on the agenda is going to be the lazy shot. And if you have a look there, you can see the diver with the yellow G-box. They're currently removing their tag, and then Rick is forming an orderly queue just off to his side. So Rick will go in next, and then I'm going to go and get mine after that. You can also see the lazy shot there is under a bit of tension. I don't think there's too much current because nobody's hanging on for grim death on the shot line. So it's probably just it was pulled down quite well to make it quite nice and tight, which is obviously something that we try and do. But you see there's only 2 tags left on there, so that means there's 2 divers below us, and also probably means it's going to get released fairly soon. So that's good, right? And I think it's time for me to do what I do, which is skip to the deco profile. And there it is. That's the download from the sheer water. You can see in the descent there, you can see the deepest bit of the dive is right at the beginning where I was down near the rudder, and then what you can see is go along the bottom, and then I climb back up, and that bit there is probably at the top of the stern. Carry on, in and around the engine. Don't bother going down to the bottom. There I am on my ascent. This bit here is where I change from 1.3 to 1.5, and you can see kind of go from about 10 to about 96 minutes. So accelerating my deco saves me 15 minutes. there's the rest of the profile. You can see fairly steady. Obviously, get at the trapeze when I'm shallow, and the big news for this is I come up at 2 hours 33 minutes. So I'm 3 minutes overdue what the skipper would like. So obviously that's not very good, and clearly I'm in trouble. But this is right at the end of the dive here. You can see there's the trapeze underneath me. You can see my strobes hanging off me there, and just waiting for my final bit of deco to clear. Now, some people ask me about what happens at the end of the dive. Well, as you can see here, I'm all alone. So all the other divers have finished their deco. They've come up once their deco is clear, and I'm the last diver onto the boat. And there it is. You can see the boats stood by, which is always nice to see. And because conditions are so good at the moment, they can go really close to the shot as he has here. And you can see me just swimming over to the back of the boat. Engines are stopped. Always good. No props turning. They're bad. And I'm going to be getting on the lift, getting out of the water. I very much hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you've enjoyed hearing all about the Harold Young. I hope you've enjoyed the sad tale of Berndt Boost, who was killed by the ship that he sunk. I hope you've enjoyed hearing all about the East Points, the sterling work that it did in Gallipoli, and all the other stories that surround the ship and surround the people involved, and including stuff such as the U-48. Absolutely unbelievable story. But that's me for this one. But I very much hope you'll give us a like, you'll leave us a comment, and of course I hope you watch my next video. Thank you very much.